Everything I want to say is said by putting things together. In my studio, I was always like arranging things. You know, this is right out of school. I was like, well, I couldn't sort of say that this was my art. No, it wasn't art with a capital A. But it was really who I was. Why don't we switch this back for that figure, the original figure?
Yeah.
And just sort of go back to that. And when you start doing what you really, really believe in, that's when you do your best work. I did all these pieces with these weird tchotchkes, these so-called black collectibles. This one actually was given to me, so now I'm trying to make one big piece with as many of them as possible and get them out of my life. It's just sort of bad juju. I really don't have any desire to make things with my hands, particularly, directly. I don't know when I left that behind, but I get everything that satisfies my soul from bringing objects that are in the world and manipulating them, working with spatial arrangements, and then having things produced the way I want to see them. I love making this stuff. I love doing it. And it's not easy in that it's simple, but it's easy in that it just flows out of me. This is just so bad. It's the worst one. I'm totally inspired by things around me. I look at things and wonder what they are and why they are. Everything interests me. You know, a gum wrapper could interest me as much as something, you know, at the Met. As I get older, I realize that your identity is really tied largely to your experiences and that time period that you grew up. I was born in the 50s. I grew up in the suburbs. When I was at elementary school age, I was the only black child in the entire school, and I was shunned because I was different. My world was not, even though it seemed like everything was nice, I didn't have any friends. My connection to the black community was tangential for those formative years. So a lot of my project is trying to understand the visual world around me, which really affects me. Hold it. Yeah, that's about right, yeah. For me, that's the basis for a lot of what I do. It's really where that pain comes from. My mother married an African-American man. Her sister married a man from the West Indies and then a man from Belgium. And when her other sister married a man from India, and her cousin married a man from China, it's difficult for me to not look at people in the world and see everyone as a relative. To me, they're familiar in the root of the word, family, familiar. I feel comfortable with people. But that comfort is tempered by the fact that people may not feel that way about me. When I watch glassblowing, it's like the creation of a planet or something. You get seduced by the material, by the process. And then you almost don't care what it looks like afterwards. You know what, I'm going to stand right here, because this way I get the same angle as the slide. Glass is always a liquid. It never completely solidifies, even though it looks like it's solid. It actually is still moving. And so making it into these drip forms makes inherent sense for the material. And I wanted to use black glass because it represents ink, it represents oil, it represents tar. Some of them have eyes on them. For me, these cartoon eyes, because of 1930s cartoons, which were recycled in my childhood in the 60s, were representing African Americans in a very derogatory way. I sort of view them as black tears. So that, to me, is ultimately a sad commentary. Working with printmaking is very similar to working with glass in that it's outside of what I do. In printmaking, I realized that if I could just drop acid with this stuff called spit bite, just pour it onto a plate and it would eat onto the plate, and it would, kind of make a spot or a splash. And filling it with black ink, it sort of retains this spot quality, and it also has kind of a three-dimensional quality, which doesn't happen when you just use ink on a piece of paper. The directness of that really thrilled me, and the fact that that's what I'm interested in, these drips and drops, really worked for me. Yeah, that's doing fine. Even before I did the drips in glass, I've been thinking about spots and just this reduction of blackness to this kind of ridiculous degree. I think it's interesting, I think it's funny, I think it's ultimately really sad. All these representations that I grew up with are telling me who I am, whether I realize it or not. And so by pulling them all out and have them talk to each other is my sort of taking control of who I am through these voices. And also trying to understand who I am, what is me, and what is something that the rest of the world has said I am. It comes from this deep sadness that that's kind of the baseline. I'm not a sad person, but, it bubbles up inside me.
That's starting to look better.
Yeah.
Ooh, nice.
There are these, like in cartoons, thought bubbles where the spots they drop, talk to each other, and various conversations emerge from the relationship between these spots. To me, it made sense that the representations of Africans in books would be the voices for these representations of blackness or black people in these spots. And so they all talk to each other, and these different characters, they kind of, the voices and personalities come out from these little blurbs. I was thrilled to be chosen to represent the United States for the Venice Biennale. The work in Venice had many different parts, and the part that is the most abstract was this room that I created of black and white tile. There was this huge black urn on its side, and in it was a small bed, a cappuccino cup, some newspapers, magazines, CD player. I did those pieces right after September 11th, wanting the world to go back to the way it was before. It's called Safe Haven. Right around that time, my mother was getting extremely ill and was not going to get better. So this kind of womb shape that came out, I do think it has a relationship with thinking about my mom. I'm interested in invisible processes within museums. I really start museum projects without knowing what I'm going to do. I try to just go in tabula rasa and try just to sort of be a sponge. Okay, right there. I work site-specifically. In Sweden, I started the way I normally start. I meet everyone, look at the collection, and talk to people about the collection and research the collection and try to understand where I am, the city I'm in, and make a piece. I need to get a sense of what this floor is going to look like. The model is good, but this really helps. I'm creating a meta-narrative about museums and display. I would like to put in one of the platforms so I can see how that looks from different angles. Mm-hmm. I'm just using the museum as my palette, basically. Yeah, manipulating objects, light, color, spatial relationships, and critiquing as well the notion of museum.
Can you help me to take notes?
Yes, I will put the gloves here for a minute. Well, it's certainly stone in here.
Yeah.
What happens with a lot of museums is that galleries are arranged by historians who are really interested in the history of the object themselves, and not really so focused on the environment these are placed in, the juxtaposition of objects, and what meaning are they creating. Besides the visual of the object, what is the visual of the space doing to the object, doing to your experience, and sort of try to kind of infuse it into those spaces. It's not only the visual, it's how this aesthetic experience affects you emotionally and physically. and the power of that. You know, I'm interested in all that stuff. Stones, which seem to be the least movable objects on the earth, are moving everywhere. The project really became not only the movement of stones and archaeological material, but the movement of people. The stones I'm choosing because I think they're interesting, and I think they're interesting in how they look together. It's kind of an archaeological site that would never be and never would be like this. But it's just to get this idea across of these things being everywhere and that they travel around the world. People take them from one place to another. And since I found this one stone from my family's island, and so I saw this connection between how stone can kind of connect to your identity. I'm very interested in juxtaposition of objects, how juxtaposition of very different objects can bring up a new idea, a new thought. There's no manipulation of the objects other than their positioning, and that changes the meaning or the relationship or how you think about them, and this is everything that I'm about. I would like to think that objects have memories, and we have memories about certain objects. A lot of what I do is eliciting memory from an object. The other piece that expresses another side of what I've been doing with museums, the piece called Picasso Whose Rules, using a large photo blow-up of Demoiselle d'Avignon, the famous painting by Picasso, an African mask, and a video, also covers a lot of other my interests about art, modernism, ethnography, and African culture. And when I did that, I was feeling very strongly about how modernism was a part of the destruction of traditional African culture. When Picasso found African things in the shops in France, he saw something far greater in them, which, of course, we're all thankful to him for. However, neither the missionaries, the military men, nor Picasso had a clue as to what these things were really about. If you look through the eyes of the mask, there's a video of two African friends and myself speaking about what makes art great. And there are a lot of convoluted questions like, if your modern art is our traditional art, does that make our contemporary art your cliché?
To learn more about Art 21, Art in the 21st Century, and to download the free Educator's Guide, please visit PBS online at pbs.org. Art 21, Art in the 21st Century is available on videocassette or with additional features on DVD. The companion book to the program is also available. To order, call PBS Home Video at 1-800-PLAY-PBS.